Hello, everyone. Hello, good afternoon. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Hi, Dr. Sachin.
Hi.
Good afternoon.
Hi. Hi.
Welcome.
Am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are very much audible.
Thank you.
Yes, there are people joining, so I'm letting everyone in.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are recording this for the school's purpose.
Hello, Nanda ma'am. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Hi. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
There are right now we have some 9 participants. Do we wait for some time?
Yeah, I think it's not yet 3:15, ma'am. We'll wait.
Yeah. Shirish cannot hear. You cannot hear me? Can you hear me, everyone?
Yeah. I can hear you.
And Sachin, I'm making you the host. Should I make you the host before admitting everyone?
Okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
if sir wanted to share a presentation, he'll be able to.
Yeah,
do that.
I'll make you the
Yeah.
host. Yes.
Because I have a PPT with me.
Yes. Yes, so Sachin also is a host now. Yes, so maybe if some people are waiting in the waiting room, you can also admit, Sachin, because now I think,
Yeah.
yeah, from my side, it's not happening. Yes, should we begin? Or we wait for a few more, there are 2 more minutes. 2 more minutes we have. We'll begin once it's 3:15. Yeah, only to say that if the meeting ends at the 40 minutes time, you can rejoin the same link so that we will be again back in the same meeting. Yes, so is everyone able to join? I can see few of my students, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi.
Okay, you are able to add people, no? From there, you are able to add those who are in the waiting room. Are you able to add them, Sachin? Dr. Sachin, are you?
Yeah. I am.
Yeah, because now I have not got that control to admit people. Yes, so good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the talk by Dr. Sachin Kettar. Let me introduce let me introduce him to all of you. He is an eminent person in his own field of translation studies and language and literature. He is a professor currently with the MS University of Vadodara and in the English department. He is very well read, and if I start talking about all his achievements, it will take the whole time up of the meeting. So a little bit that I can tell you, he's a very good blogger. He has been called in several countries and all across India for presenting papers. He has been holding seminars and he has been into various literary interactions around the world and in India too. So here we are today presenting Dr. Sachin Kettar on the topic of comparative studies and little more about art and theory of knowledge. How can we connect art and theory of knowledge? That is what we are looking at today, along with comparing how to do comparative studies in art and literature, because literature also is a form of art. I welcome everyone to join. Very peaceful evening for every one of us. Over to you, Sachin.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nanda, for that generous introduction. And I want to thank the organizers, especially the MIT IB School, for giving me a chance to share my work with you. And I'm privileged to be with some of the very young and keen minds of your school, as well as some of my own students and my friends, colleagues have joined this conversation. So
Nice.
I would like to thank you for that.
Have joined too. That will be good for our school also.
Yeah. So thanks a lot for having me here. As you had suggested that I speak on the multiple arts and the relation between multiple arts. And then as I looked at the syllabus and the kind of readings that IB school has to do, then I also saw that there is something like theory of knowledge, and the question and the model that you often follow is that of inquiry, a philosophical inquiry into various complex questions and issues of your time, including art and other things, science and other things. So I thought of connecting these two and talk a bit about a thinker who is not spoken of much, or there is very little interest when we in his work. So my attempt is to connect this theory of knowledge and the question of inquiry with the question of comparison of arts, various arts that we have. And in comparative studies, which is my primary area of research, we often talk of something called grounds for comparison, or the rationale or the reason why we compare, say, for example, a film called Heidegger and a play called Hamlet. There should be some concrete grounds and a rationale for this comparison between, say, a cinema and literature, say, for example. Right. So in comparative studies, we often talk about grounds for comparison. And very often when we look at various and comparison between various forms of art falls within comparative literature. It is called something called inter-artistic comparison. And that is a very important area of comparative literary studies. However, what I am trying to do is something which is hardly done in comparative art studies. And what I'm going to be talking about falls into the domain of very, very rigorous, hardcore philosophy that I'm going to be talking about today. And I just want you to be with me. If it's not too difficult, it's still fine, because we are trying to think of things which are not thought of in the usual way that we do theory of knowledge or theory of art or whatever. And what I'm telling you right now will make sense as we proceed further in our presentation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about a philosopher named Martin Heidegger, and why he put various arts together and how he went about it. And to understand that, first we have to get an overview of Martin Heidegger's own philosophical preoccupations, for that matter. And in the light of those broader questions of that Martin Heidegger raises, we are going to look at what he has to say about art. So I will start sharing my screen, and I also request, I think, some people who have their mics, who have not muted their mics, maybe Shruti and Shirish may mute this mic so that we can have this. Okay, so we start. So I'm trying to now share screen with you. I don't know if you can see it. Can you see the screen that I have shared? Okay. Okay. So here we go. So we begin with right in the middle of, I think, what is one of the core aspects of IB curriculum, and that is the theory of knowledge. And theory of knowledge, as you have been discussing, we are going to look at something that almost, to use Heidegger's own word, deconstructs or destruction of all theories of knowledge. And if you look at Western traditions of knowledge, and that is what primarily we are going to talk about, then they usually begin with this question, like what is justice, right? Or what is God, what is love, what is matter, what is COVID-19, what is art? And these kind of questions very often lead to definitions of those objects. So for example, you define justice is ABCD, and that falls under the larger discipline of political philosophy. What is God? Then God is something, and that falls under theology. What is love? Love is something, and I don't know which discipline it falls under. What is matter? Falls under the discipline of physics. So disciplines organize themselves in around these questions, which are what if type of questions. And what is art usually falls traditionally under the discipline called aesthetics. And these questions are usually what is known as questions about essences, and Western philosophy has often made a distinction between essence and existence. By essence, it means what something is, and by existence is that the fact that something exists. So the wall or the screen that you're holding in your hand, what that object is falls under essence, and the fact that it exists is the existence of it. So that's how usually Western knowledge traditions are organized. Now, Martin Heidegger begins by questioning the very act of question itself. And he has two very important and very fundamental problems with the very act of inquiry or a theory of knowledge, or very act of raising a question like what is love or what is justice. And that is something that he calls the circularity of questions, by which I mean that suppose you start out by questioning what is God or what is love or what is art, then you already have some knowledge of it, preconceived knowledge of it, which will lead you to make that inquiry. So you already have some knowledge of what is God to ask the question, what is God? So it's almost a paradox. It's a paradoxical inquiry where you are asking questions about something that you already know about. And very often these preconceived notions guide inquiry, but they also tend to delimit our inquiry, because whatever you find, if it clashes with your preconceptions, then there is a certain kind of a crisis in the discipline itself. So this circularity, the paradoxical circularity of question is the first problem. When you ask what is justice, then you already know what is justice to ask that, identify it as an object of your question. So you say, yes, this is justice, and now I'm asking question, what is justice to it? So first you have to identify this is justice in first place, so that you can ask questions, what is justice? So that is a paradoxical thing that happens in the question. Now the second problem is far more fundamental and probably groundbreaking in terms of Heidegger's own philosophical approach. And this is where I think he broke entirely new grounds, unprecedented in Western philosophy. And the question that the problem that he has, that when we ask a question like what is love, what is God, what is art, what is justice, then we do not bother to clarify for ourselves that what is the meaning of is over here, right? What is is? What do we mean by God is? Then what is is? What art is? Then art, what is the meaning of is here? That is, the question of being is extremely vaguely preconceived, not just that, it's often swept under the carpet. So what is love or what is God? We take for granted what is the meaning of is. And I think from here on, our discussion gets far more challenging for all of us. And I request you to be patient and be in the conversation, because these are the questions that have not been asked very frequently in the Western philosophy, and hence they are completely unfamiliar. So why is this question of being so important? Then Heidegger argues that most of the disciplines, like say for example biology or physics or political science or aesthetics for that matter, which we are going to talk about at length, are epistemological fields. That means they are concerned with knowledge, how you get knowledge and what is valid knowledge. And they are based on things like justice, art, God. Then what is God, what is love, what is justice? These questions fall in the domain of ontology, or what things really are. So all epistemological fields are draw upon ontologies, and Martin Heidegger argues that ontology as a philosophy in the West is highly underdeveloped and deeply flawed. So he sets out to dismantle this ontological foundation of all fields of knowledge. All right. So when we ask the question, what is a black hole, then not only we have assumed some knowledge of black hole in order to understand more about a black hole, but we also have assumed what is the meaning of being, like what is it is. And it is this ontological approach is based on the premise that being of the beings, that is things, entities or objects like God or art, work or matter or whatever, is itself a being, entity, object, right? So this, according to Heidegger, is the core problem with Western philosophy, and it is, in his view, called metaphysical. By metaphysical, you mean you explain what something is as itself. So if I, to give you an example, the screen that you have in front of me, I ask you, what is the meaning of the being of this screen? Then you will say this screen is screen, say for example, right? You explain screen in terms of as if it's an object, but the being of that object and that object for us lie collapsed together in the traditional Western metaphysical thought, in traditional knowledge traditions in the West, right? And so in one of his books, he goes on to say that most thought-provoking thing in our thought-provoking time is that we are still not thinking, right? And it's a strange statement to make. We think that we have done so much in philosophy that we can't obviously read everything in our life. There is huge amount of material on philosophy, hundreds of books. But then Martin Heidegger says that it's all based on metaphysics, in the sense we are trying to understand being as if it's an entity or an object or a thing. And we have not really started asking this question, dwelling in this question rigorously, the question of being. And that's why it's we have not yet started thinking. So if you are feeling slightly confused or disoriented, in the sense that you can get what I'm saying, but still you can't understand what I'm saying, that can be one of the issues that you will face throughout the lecture, that you get what I'm saying, but you don't understand what I'm saying, is because our thought is trained to understand being as being. And we will clarify as we proceed further. So if you feel exasperated, it's perfectly fine. Bored, perfectly fine, because human beings have not yet started thinking. And what Heidegger's massive oeuvre does is that he calls it on the way to thinking, right? It's we have just started thinking. We are on our way to thinking. We are not really thinking. So 1889 to 1976 is Heidegger's life period here. So what do we even mean by being, right? I would like to ask questions to some of you, if you like to respond in 1 or 2 minutes, because it's not an easy question. But when I ask you a question that what do you mean when the phone that you're holding or the laptop or the screen that you are looking at right now exists, is, right? What this screen is, that what is that being, isness of the screen? Then what can be the possible answer? Say, for example, would anyone like to try? One of you can maybe unmute yourself and try that. What do we mean when I say what is meaning of being of this screen? How will you respond to it?
Can I? Can it
Yeah.
be called as
Please.
thing? It's a thing that can be seen, held in the hand, and felt. Yes.
Yeah, right. So when I ask you what is meaning of this laptop or phone, you say that it is something that you can hold in your hand, experience it. It's in front of you, right? It is something that is in front of you. It can be experienced. Now look at some other objects around us. For example, some of you may have this nightmare of a burglar or the rabid dog that enters your home or is running after you, and you are scared, right? And you wake up feeling scared. Then you realize that there was no dog or the burglar, right? But at the same time, you experience so you experienced that thing, right? But at the same time, that thing does not exist, for example. Or look at something like the soldier that you shot in your PUBG game, right? What do you mean when you say that soldier exists, right? What is being of that? The object itself is virtual, you say, right? So experience in itself, the very fact that it is experienceable, does not give you the meaning of being. Something has to exist before you can experience it, right? So being precedes our experience, right? Very strange. So being is a precondition, not just for presence, but also absence or virtual presence of the object itself, right? The question of meaning of beings is inseparable from our being there. You can experience whose experience? It's our experience, our being there. So it is the question of our being that is involved deeply with the question of being of this laptop in front of you, or the phone that you're holding, or the PC that you have. The being of that and our being there, right, are deeply interconnected. You cannot separate these two questions at all. And our being there is what Heidegger would call Dasein, as our being there. And it is also inseparable from the question of temporality or time. So in his book called Being and Time, that's the first path-breaking book that he wrote. He elaborates upon the whole meaning of Dasein as well as the question of being, emphasizing everywhere that the being of being is not being. The being of this phone is something that precedes its presence so that you can experience it. It's something mysterious. We don't even know what we are talking about when we say being of the being. So if some of you are feeling confused what is being discussed here, and that confusion is deeply embedded in the traditions of thinking that we have grown up in, right? And it's largely coming from the Western philosophical traditions that we are exposed to as part of our education system. And we have never asked this question for ourselves, that what is the meaning of being over here? And this is what he means, that the being of the being is not being. This is exactly the opposite of what Western philosophy says, that being of being is being. That being of this PC is the object PC, but it is something that makes this experience of this object possible. It's a precondition for the presence or absence, right? So being is something that is before presence or absence. So we come to the whole question of art here, and we are going to now look at his questions, and you can look up his book called Being and Time for elaborate discussion on the meaning of being, and he does it from phenomenological perspective of everyday experiencing. So what he means by being is he wants to demonstrate that how it governs our everyday behavior, right? Every scratching our back or scratching our nose to whatever, right? Driving and you are not aware that you are driving and yet you drive, right? How does that happen? You don't know that you are walking and you walk and you open the door. And this flies in the face of Western philosophy, especially Cartesian philosophy, which was built around this dichotomy of the world as an objective presence versus you. So these two things existed independently of each other. But in our everyday experience of it, that never happens. That world is out there and you are here separately. You are inseparable from world. You are within world. Your being is inside of the world itself. And very often you don't exist. You exist, come into exist when there is something wrong that you sense. So the whole question of individual self is also something that does not exist on everyday behavior. When you're driving a two-wheeler, you don't see that this is road, this is bike, I am here, and now I do it. It happens, right? So his analysis of Dasein that he elaborately undertakes in his book, Being and Time, is something that you would like to look up. But right now, because of great constraint of time, we are going to look at art. And he is asking the same question about aesthetics, that what do you mean by a work of art? We tend to think of work of art as an object or a thing, right? And this thing has a whole tradition of thinking that has gone into what do we even mean by a thing. And very often when we say something, a thing, it has got three meanings to it. One is that something around which it has properties, it is assembled. Like, say for example, this laptop has a digital screen and maybe a keyboard or whatever. So it has properties, a thing around which there are properties. Hence, beauty is often seen as one of the property of the object. Say, for example, a painting or a poem or a novel. It has this, just like digital, this phone has a screen, that art has this property of, maybe it's shining, so it's property of that object. Secondly, as unity of manifold sensations or as formed matter. That is unity of content and shape, or content and form. So form-content dichotomy, that goes on and on and on in Western philosophy for hundreds of years. We tend to think of art in terms of form and content, comes from thinking about art as if it's an object, right? It's a being, not its being. We never ask questions about being of work of art. Modern aesthetics also think of work as equipments or a tool having some utility. What is function? We ask questions like, what is function of art? As if it's a spanner or something. What's the function of it? And hence, creative process is also thought of something like making something or making an object or an equipment involving technique and craftsmanship. Hence, the Western tradition of thinking about art overlooks, that is, represses, avoids the question of what work of art is as a being, and treats the work of art primarily as if it's a thing, an object. So capital B in our presentation indicates being as a question that we are exploring, and being as an object or the thing or the entity. That is. So commodification of work of art by art industries and business is also related to tendency to treat it as if it's a object. So you sell art, it's an object, like you sell vada pav, right? So the market of arts will functions on this assumption that it's an object, right? There are 10 more minutes before this will close down, and then we'll re-log in using the same link, right? Okay, so here he goes. So he asked the question of being of work of art, what work of art actually is, right, ontologically, as against the thing being, that is epistemologically. The question of beauty, according to Heidegger, cannot be raised without addressing the radically rethought meaning of the notion of truth. This is where he digresses and goes into the whole question of what is truth in Western tradition. And in Western tradition, truth usually means agreement or conformity of knowledge with the fact. Propositional truth is this correctness. So a proposition or knowledge like the sun rises in the east is true because of its conformity or agreement with this proposition, which is the fact, the sun rises. So there is a fact and there is a proposition or a statement, and there is a relation between them of trueness, right, correctness. And that is truth according to the Western philosophical tradition very often. And what you can see here, is that you are still treating truth as if it is, I'm sorry, you are treating truth as if it's a thing. There is a statement and there is a fact and there is correctness of truth. So the question that he asked, that how can you even say that something is true unless both proposition and the fact both show up in front of you, right? They appear in front of you, like this screen is there in front of you, right, just now. Unless they show up in front of you, you cannot say whether this proposition is right or wrong. So this showing up, this occurrence of what he called unconcealedness is what truth is about. By unconcealedness, he means that something comes before us, right, ourself. It shows up in our presence as something what it is. So this screen that you have in front of you has shown up in front of you, right? This showing up is unconcealedness, and the Greek word for it is aletheia. And the Greeks then just touched upon this, and then this forgot the whole idea of what it actually means. So this unconcealedness is an occurrence. It's a happening. It's not a thing. So being, truth of the being, according to Heidegger, is not an object, but a happening of something coming in front of you, appearing unconcealed way. So this unconcealedness is the precondition, an a priori, for something to be true or false. Hence, truth is an essence of what is true, right? So what makes something true is the essence, truth. And that is unconcealedness, and that is of that which is as something that is. So that's how he defines unconcealedness. Now this unconcealedness is a kind of a priori for epistemological conditions. To find out what is black hole has to unconceal itself in front of you so that you can get knowledge about you. That has to happen, right? It is not something that you make happen, it happens. So that is what he means by truth. And you can see that the conventional thinking about truth in Western paradigm has been epistemological, while Heidegger is coming up with ontological definition of truth, something that is very difficult and different from the established canons or logic of truth itself. This unconcealedness of beings is what Heidegger indicates as being with capital B. The truth is the truth of being. There is a clearing and lightening in midst of beings as a whole, things as a whole, and thanks to this clearing, the beings are unconcealed. But they can be concealed true only within this clearing. So the things can be also hidden, right? It may not come in front of you, or it may come up in front of you in some other form. Like say for example, the phone algorithms come up in form of the soldier that you kill in your PUBG game. It's not there. It's an algorithm that has come up, and it shows itself as that soldier. So the virtuality of it is you think that it's a soldier that you have shot, right? So it is what he calls dissembling. It doesn't reveal itself in its true form, but some other form. So truth is something that is prior to both truth and false, right? It is untruth and true and untrue both belong to truth according to Heidegger. And this is a very difficult idea to hold together in our heads. That unless things are unconcealed, we cannot call them as true or false. And this double concealment also belongs to the nature of truth. By double concealment, I mean that something shows up in a different form, right? Or it doesn't show up at all. COVID-19 did not show up till now, right? Then it shows up, it unconceals itself in our clearing, right? And you know what happens. Otherwise, it may come up in some other form. You may think it is something else, but it comes out as something else. So artwork, according to Heidegger, opens in its own way the being of beings. So art for him has something deeply to do with the phenomena of truth, something called truth. This opening up, this deconcealing, the truth of being happens in work of art, in the artwork. The truth of what is has set itself to work. And that is what he says, that in an artwork, the truth of what it is has set itself to work. Art is truth itself setting itself to work. It's not that the artist has done it, right? It's not subjective for him. It is somewhere where truth has happened in that being, that canvas, that song, that poem, or whatever. Look at this. This is the famous painting of shoes by Vincent van Gogh. And there are 2 or 3 things that he has a sustained reflection on. And that is this one pair of shoes by Vincent van Gogh. And he defines beauty is one way in which truth occurs as unconcealedness. All of us have seen shoes, right? And when we wear shoes, the shoes disappear, right? Into its utility, it's what should I say? It disappears in its function. But here the shoes are unconcealed. They are in front of you, but they don't disappear into their utility, right? It's there, right? And what happens here is that the wearer of the shoes and the person who is watching them, they belong to certain world which is revealed through this painting. And the world is a very important idea in Heidegger. By world, he doesn't mean everything that is independent of me, right? It's not the ever objective, but world is something to which all of us belong. It's made up of beings rather than being. World as an ontological phenomena rather than epistemological phenomena. So this painting reveals the world of that peasant, and this revelation is this unconcealment reveals that the shoes are what they are, right? So shoes show up as being in their being with capital B in these 2 paintings. And we'll be talking about this as we go ahead. For example, this is the Greek temple that he describes at great length. Some of the most poetic passages in aesthetics you can find in this description of this Greek temple as well. The work as work sets up a world of the wearer, the shoes, and it unconceals this world. But unlike the equipment, that's what I've said, right? Say the shoes that we use, the work in setting up the world does not cause the material, that is colors, canvas, stone, sounds, words, from which we make work of art, disappear into their usefulness. Right now I'm saying, and I'm using words, but these words disappear into their function, utility. You don't notice those words, you notice